Welcome back to the Duke's Revenge, where the coldest hearts burn the hottest. I'm so glad you're here with me today for another tale of betrayal, obsession, and aristocratic revenge. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you listening from right now? Drop your city and your local time in the comments. I love seeing our community span across continents. Tonight's story takes us deep into the heart of 1863 London, where a father's desperation leads him to offer his 3 beautiful daughters to the most feared man in England. For years, the eldest daughter has watched her younger sisters shine while she faded into the background, too serious, too tall, too sharp-tongued for any gentleman's taste. But what her family doesn't know is that the Duke of Blackmoore has been watching her. And when her father lines up his daughters like prized horses at auction, the Duke's answer will shatter everything they thought they knew about power, desire, and revenge. They expected him to choose the prettiest. They assumed he'd want the sweetest. But when the Duke's cold gray eyes settled on the forgotten eldest daughter, and he spoke those 5 words that would change her life forever, the entire drawing room fell into stunned silence. What did he see in her that made him willing to destroy her family's carefully laid plans? Let me take you back to that November afternoon, where the fire crackled in the hearth and desperation hung thick in the air, and where one woman's life was about to become the centerpiece of the most dangerous man's carefully orchestrated revenge. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the London streets into rivers of mud and making the interior of Hartwell House feel like a tomb. Lady Vivienne Hartwell stood at the window of the drawing room, her fingertips pressed against the cold glass as she watched the water stream down in endless sheets. Behind her, she could hear her stepmother's shrill voice echoing through the corridors, barking orders at the servants as they prepared for the arrival that would determine the fate of their entire family. "Vivienne, for God's sake, step away from that window. You'll catch your death, and we can't have you looking any more peaked than you already do." Lady Cordelia Hartwell swept into the room in a rustle of emerald silk, her face pinched with the particular variety of displeasure she reserved exclusively for her eldest stepdaughter. "And fix your hair. It's coming loose again. I don't know why you insist on pulling it back so severely. You look like a governess." Vivienne turned slowly from the window, her hands falling to her sides. At 28, she had long since stopped flinching at her stepmother's barbs. They rolled off her now like the rain rolled off the window glass, persistent, cold, but ultimately powerless to penetrate the armor she'd built over years of practice. "I am perfectly well, Cordelia, and my hair is fine." "Your hair is never fine. Nothing about you is fine." Cordelia crossed to the mirror above the mantelpiece, adjusting her own perfectly coiffed golden curls with the satisfaction of a woman who knew her beauty was her greatest weapon. "Thank heavens your sisters inherited their looks from my side of the family. At least they have a chance of salvaging this disaster your father has brought down upon us." The disaster in question was debt-crushing, suffocating debt that had been mounting for the better part of a decade. Vivienne's father, Lord Edmund Hartwell, had always possessed more ambition than sense, more dreams than discipline. He'd invested in ventures that crumbled, backed schemes that evaporated, thrown money at problems that only grew larger with feeding. And now, finally, the creditors were circling like wolves around a dying deer. "Where is father?" Vivienne asked quietly, moving away from the window to stand near the fire. Even in November, she was always cold. It was as if the chill had settled into her bones years ago and never quite left. In his study, drinking himself into a stupor, I imagine. Cordelia's mouth twisted with disgust. "As if that will help anything. The Duke of Blackmoore will be here within the hour, and your father needs to have his wits about him if we're to have any chance of securing this match." Vivienne's stomach tightened at the mention of the Duke. Everyone in London knew of Sebastian Blackmoore, the man whose fortune was matched only by his reputation for ruthlessness. He was 35, unwed, and notorious for crushing anyone who dared cross him in business or society. Men feared him. Women were fascinated by him in the way one might be fascinated by a beautiful predator, admiring from a safe distance, knowing that getting too close meant certain destruction. "He's coming to assess us," Vivienne said flatly. It wasn't a question. She knew exactly why the Duke had agreed to visit Hartwell House. Her father had written to him weeks ago, a desperate letter that Vivienne had accidentally discovered in his study. The letter had been shameless in its pleading Lord Hartwell offering any of his daughters in marriage in exchange for the Duke assuming his debts. It had read like a merchant's inventory list, describing each girl's attributes as if they were horses at Tattersall's. "He's coming to choose a bride," Cordelia corrected sharply. "And it will be one of my daughters, Charlotte, with her golden curls and sweet disposition. Or perhaps Beatrice, who plays the pianoforte like an angel. Even young Dorothea, who is only 17 but already the beauty of the season." She turned to fix Vivienne with a cold stare. "It will not be you. You're far too old, too plain, and too unmarketable. I've told your father to keep you out of sight during the Duke's visit. We can't risk you spoiling the impression." Something flickered in Vivienne's chest, not hurt. She was beyond that now, but something darker. A cold, bitter amusement at the transparency of it all. "Of course, I'll make myself scarce." "See that you do." Cordelia moved toward the door, then paused. "And Vivienne, don't do anything foolish. Don't speak to the Duke if he happens to see you. Don't draw attention to yourself. Your sister's futures depend on this match, and I won't have you ruining it with your sharp tongue and your unfortunate tendency toward honesty. Men don't want honest women. They want agreeable ones." When Cordelia left, the room seemed to exhale. Vivienne stood alone by the fire, listening to the rain and the distant sounds of preparation echoing through the house. Her 3 half-sisters would be in their rooms now, being dressed and primped and coached on exactly how to smile, how to laugh, how to flutter their eyelashes in that particular way that made men feel clever and powerful. She had never learned those skills, or rather, she had never been taught them. After her mother died when Vivienne was 8, her father had remarried within a year, bringing Cordelia and her obsession with social advancement into their home. Vivienne had been shuffled aside, raised by a series of governesses while Cordelia focused all her attention on producing the perfect daughters, Charlotte, Beatrice, and Dorothea, each one more lovely and accomplished than the last. Vivienne had grown up in the shadows of Hartwell House, watching her sisters be prepared for the marriage market while she was prepared for nothing at all. By the time she was old enough to debut, Cordelia had declared her too old, too tall, too serious. "No man wants a wife who makes him feel stupid," Cordelia had said. "And you, my dear, have a terrible habit of being right about things." So Vivienne had stayed home while her sisters went to balls. She'd read books in the library while they practiced their watercolors. She'd taken long walks alone while they entertained suitors in the drawing room. And slowly, year by year, she'd become invisible, the forgotten eldest daughter, the spinster, the one no one mentioned in polite conversation. Now she was 28, well past the age when marriage was even a possibility. And yet here she was, about to meet the most feared man in England, who was coming to choose one of her sisters like he might choose a new horse for his stables. The thought should have made her angry. Instead, it just made her tired. She was about to retreat to her room as Cordelia had ordered when she heard the sound of carriage wheels on gravel. Her heart lurched. He was early. The Duke of Blackmoore was early, which meant the carefully orchestrated presentation Cordelia had planned would be thrown into chaos. Vivienne moved back to the window and looked down at the circular drive. Through the rain, she could see a gleaming black carriage pulled by 4 matched grays. And as she watched, the door opened and a man stepped out. Even from this distance, even through the rain, Sebastian Blackmoore was arresting. He was tall, far taller than her father, with broad shoulders encased in a perfectly tailored black coat. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from never having been denied anything in his life, his steps sure and unhurried despite the downpour. He didn't wait for a servant to bring an umbrella. He simply walked through the rain as if it wouldn't dare touch him. Vivienne's breath caught. She had seen the Duke before, of course, at a distance during the season, but she had never been this close, never had the opportunity to really look at him. Even through the rain-blurred window, she could make out the sharp lines of his face, the aristocratic nose, the mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. He looked up suddenly, his gaze sweeping the facade of Hartwell House, and for one impossible moment, Vivienne could have sworn his eyes locked with hers, gray eyes, cold as winter stone. She froze, unable to look away, her hand still pressed against the glass. Then he was moving again, disappearing beneath the portico, and Vivienne heard the heavy knock at the front door echo through the house. She should leave. She should go to her room and hide as Cordelia had ordered, but something kept her rooted in place. Some perverse curiosity, or perhaps just the knowledge that this might be the most interesting thing to happen in her life in years. Below, she could hear Cordelia's voice, artificially sweetened to a sickening degree. "Your Grace, what an honor! Please, do come in out of this dreadful weather. We weren't expecting you quite so soon, but we are delighted nonetheless. I don't believe in wasting time, Lady Hartwell." The Duke's voice drifted up through the floorboards, deep and utterly devoid of warmth. "Where is Lord Hartwell?" "He'll be down momentarily, Your Grace. In the meantime, may I offer you some refreshment? Tea? Perhaps something stronger?" "Nothing. I'm here on business, not a social call." Vivienne heard Cordelia's nervous laugh, the sound like breaking glass. "Of course, Your Grace. Though I do hope, we do hope that this might become more than mere business. My daughters are so eager to meet you. 3 exceptional young ladies. Each one. Where are they?" The Duke's voice cut through Cordelia's speech like a knife through silk. A pause. "Then, I'll have them brought down immediately, Your Grace. If you'll just wait in the drawing room. I'll wait in Lord Hartwell's study. Send him to me when he's sober enough to speak coherently." Vivienne heard footsteps heavy, male, purposeful, moving down the corridor toward her father's study. She heard Cordelia's flustered attempts to redirect him, to maintain control of the situation, but the Duke ignored her completely. For a moment, Vivienne felt an unexpected flash of sympathy for her stepmother. Cordelia had built her entire life around manipulation and social maneuvering, around controlling situations through charm and careful presentation. The Duke of Blackmoore was clearly a man who could not be manipulated, could not be charmed, and had no interest in careful presentations. He was here to conduct a transaction, nothing more. The house erupted into controlled chaos. Vivienne could hear Cordelia barking orders, sending servants to fetch Lord Hartwell, to prepare the drawing room, to bring down the girls. She could hear her sister's excited chatter drifting down from the second floor, the sound of doors opening and closing, of hurried footsteps and whispered consultations. No one came looking for Vivienne. No one remembered she existed. She stood by the window in the empty drawing room, listening to the rain and watching the Duke's carriage in the drive below, and felt the familiar weight of invisibility settle over her like a shroud. 30 minutes passed before her father finally emerged from his study, looking gray-faced and shaken. Vivienne watched him from her position by the window as he was intercepted by Cordelia in the hallway, her stepmother's hands gripping his arms as she hissed something Vivienne couldn't quite hear. "Cannot fail, Edmund. Do you understand? We have no other options. If he doesn't choose one of the girls, we're ruined. Completely ruined." "I know," her father said warily. "Believe me, Cordelia, I know. Then pull yourself together. Act like a man instead of a coward. And for God's sake, don't grovel. Men like Blackmoore respect strength, not weakness. Vivienne felt another flicker of that dark amusement. Cordelia advising her father not to grovel, while the entire reason for this meeting was essentially an exercise in high society groveling. They were selling their daughters to pay off debts. There was no way to dress that up as strength. Her father straightened his shoulders, ran a hand through his thinning hair, and knocked on the study door. The Duke's voice came from within, commanding him to enter. The door closed. More time passed. Vivienne remained by the window, watching shadows move behind the curtains of the study, unable to make out words but sensing the weight of the conversation happening within. Her sisters had been assembled in the formal drawing room down the hall, probably arranged like a tableau, each one positioned to maximize her best features. Vivienne wondered which one the Duke would choose. Charlotte was 23, blonde and beautiful, with a kind heart that hadn't yet been completely corrupted by Cordelia's influence. Beatrice was 21, dark-haired and musical, prone to dramatic sighs and romantic fantasies. Dorothea was only 17, all wide blue eyes and innocent smiles, the kind of girl men wrote poetry about. Any of them would make a suitable duchess, at least by society's standards. Any of them would give the Duke beautiful children and run his household with competence. Any of them would be a perfectly acceptable transaction. The study door opened suddenly, and Vivienne's father emerged looking even more gray than before. Behind him came the Duke, and for the first time, Vivienne could see him clearly in the light of the corridor. He was devastatingly handsome in the way that dangerous things often are. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, dark hair that fell just slightly over his forehead. But it was his eyes that caught her, those cold gray eyes that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. He wore his power like other men wore cologne, an invisible but unmistakable presence that preceded him into every room. "The girls are in the drawing room, Your Grace," Cordelia was saying, having materialized from somewhere to insert herself into the proceedings. "If you'll just lead the way," the Duke said curtly. They moved as a group toward the formal drawing room, Cordelia in front, chattering nervously about her daughter's accomplishments. The Duke following in silence, Vivienne's father trailing behind like a whipped dog. Vivienne shrank back from the doorway of her drawing room, not wanting to be seen, not wanting to be part of this humiliating spectacle. But as the group passed her door, the Duke's head turned, his eyes found hers across the dim corridor. Time seemed to stop. Vivienne couldn't breathe, couldn't move, pinned by that gray stare like a butterfly on a collector's board. The Duke said nothing, didn't pause in his stride, but something flickered across his face, interest, recognition, something Vivienne couldn't quite name. Then he was past, following Cordelia down the corridor, and Vivienne was left standing in the doorway with her heart pounding and her hands trembling. He had seen her. The Duke of Blackmoore had seen her. She didn't know why that felt significant, but it did. Against every instinct of self-preservation, Vivienne found herself moving quietly into the corridor, following at a distance. She told herself she was merely curious. She told herself she wanted to see which sister would be chosen, wanted to witness the moment that would determine all their futures. But really, if she was honest, she wanted another look at those gray eyes. The formal drawing room was ablaze with candlelight despite the gray afternoon, every lamp and candelabra lit to show the space and its occupants to best advantage. Cordelia had arranged her daughters in a careful tableau near the windows. Charlotte seated at the pianoforte, her golden curls catching the light. Beatrice standing near an arrangement of hothouse flowers, her dark beauty dramatic against the pale blooms. Dorothea perched on the edge of a chair, her blue dress the exact color of her eyes, looking like a painting of innocence itself. Vivienne stopped in the shadowed doorway, hidden from view but able to see everything. The Duke entered the room and stopped just inside the threshold. His gaze moved over the three girls with the same expression one might use while inspecting horses at auction, analytical, detached, utterly devoid of sentiment. "Your Grace," Cordelia gushed, moving to stand beside Charlotte. "May I present my eldest daughter, Lady Charlotte Hartwell. Charlotte, dear, play something for His Grace, that piece by Mozart you've been practicing." Charlotte's fingers trembled slightly as they touched the keys, but she managed a credible performance of a Mozart sonata. The Duke listened without expression, his hands clasped behind his back, his face revealing nothing. When Charlotte finished, there was a moment of silence. Then the Duke said, "Adequate. Next." Cordelia's smile grew strained. "Of course, Your Grace. This is Lady Beatrice Hartwell. Beatrice has the most marvelous singing voice. Perhaps she might—" "No need," the Duke interrupted. "I've seen enough of her." Beatrice's face fell. Cordelia rushed to recover, practically shoving Dorothea forward. "And this is our youngest, Lady Dorothea. Only 17, but already the toast of—" "Too young." The Duke's voice was flat. He turned to face Lord Hartwell, who stood near the fireplace looking like he might be sick. "These are all your daughters." Vivienne saw her father hesitate, saw his eyes dart to Cordelia, then away. "Yes, Your Grace. 3 daughters, all of marriageable age. You're lying." The room went silent. Even the fire seemed to stop crackling. "Your Grace?" Lord Hartwell's voice came out as a croak. The Duke's gray eyes were hard as steel. I said, "You're lying. I did my research before coming here, Hartwell. You have 4 daughters, 3 by your second wife, and 1 by your first." His gaze moved past the 3 girls, past Cordelia's horrified face, and fixed on the shadowed doorway where Vivienne stood frozen. "I want to see all of them." Cordelia recovered first, letting out a shrill laugh. "Oh, Your Grace, surely you don't mean Vivienne. She's not, that is. She's far too old to be considered. Nearly 30, if you can believe it, and never married. We didn't think. I don't care what you thought. Bring her here." It wasn't a request. It was a command, delivered in a tone that suggested the Duke of Blackmoore had never been refused anything in his life and wasn't about to start now. Cordelia's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Vivienne's father looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. The 3 sisters stared at the doorway with varying expressions of confusion and resentment, and Vivienne, still hidden in shadow, felt her world tilt on its axis. He knew she existed. More than that, he wanted to see her. "Well," the Duke's voice cut through the silence like a whip. "Must I fetch her myself?" That galvanized Cordelia into action. She swept toward the doorway, her face a mask of barely concealed fury. She grabbed Vivienne's arm with fingers that dug in hard enough to bruise. "This is your fault," she hissed under her breath. "Whatever happens now, remember that." Then she was dragging Vivienne into the light, presenting her to the Duke with the enthusiasm one might show for a particularly disappointing piece of livestock. "This is Lady Vivienne Hartwell, Your Grace, my stepdaughter. As I mentioned, she's quite past the age of—" "Leave us." Cordelia stopped mid-sentence. "I beg your pardon?" I said, "Leave us. All of you. Out." "Your Grace, surely that's not appropriate. A young lady alone with—" The Duke turned his head slowly to look at Cordelia, and whatever she saw in his eyes made her take an involuntary step backward. "I am the Duke of Blackmoore. I own half of London and most of Yorkshire. I have the ear of the Queen and the fear of Parliament. I don't need you to tell me what's appropriate." He paused, letting that sink in. "Get out." Lord Hartwell was already moving toward the door, his face gray with terror and shame. Charlotte and Beatrice followed quickly, shooting confused glances at Vivienne as they passed. Dorothea lingered for a moment, her young face showing genuine concern, but Cordelia grabbed her arm and pulled her away. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Vivienne stood alone in the middle of the drawing room, facing the most feared man in England, and wondered if this was how lambs felt when they saw the wolf approaching. The Duke moved closer, his steps slow and deliberate. He circled her once, his eyes cataloging every detail of her appearance with that same analytical detachment he'd shown her sisters. Vivienne forced herself to stand still, to keep her chin up, to meet his gaze when it finally settled on her face. "How old are you?" he asked. 28, Your Grace. Why aren't you married?" The question was blunt enough to be insulting, but Vivienne found she was past caring about insults. No one ever asked. Something flickered in those gray eyes, amusement, perhaps, or respect. "I find that hard to believe." "Believe what you like. It's the truth." Vivienne kept her voice steady, refusing to flinch under his scrutiny. "I'm too tall, too serious, and too honest for most men's taste. My stepmother decided years ago that I wasn't worth the effort of a debut. So here I am, nearly 30 and unmarried, watching my younger sisters be offered up like prize cattle to a man who clearly views this entire proceeding with the same distaste I do." The Duke's eyebrows rose fractionally. "You don't approve of your father's arrangement. I think my father is a desperate man drowning in debt of his own making, and he's willing to sacrifice any of his daughters to save himself from the consequences." Vivienne felt a reckless honesty rising in her chest, the words spilling out after years of biting her tongue. "I think you're a man who's rich enough and powerful enough to buy anything you want, including a wife, and I think this entire situation is a travesty that no one in this house has the courage to name for what it is." Silence fell like a hammer. Vivienne waited for the explosion, for the Duke to turn on his heel and leave, for her father to burst through the door and disown her, for Cordelia to finally get her wish and throw Vivienne out into the street. Instead, the Duke laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, more surprise than amusement, but it transformed his face completely. For just a moment, he looked younger, less cold, almost human. "Well," he said, his mouth curving into something that wasn't quite a smile but was close enough to startle Vivienne. "Finally, someone in this God-forsaken house who speaks the truth." He moved closer, close enough that Vivienne could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive, cedar and smoke, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. He was even taller than she'd thought, and she was not a short woman. "You're right," the Duke said quietly, "about all of it. Your father is desperate and drowning. I am buying a wife because it's more efficient than courting one, and I need an heir. This entire arrangement is a travesty." He paused, his gray eyes boring into hers. "But it's the world we live in, Lady Vivienne. I didn't make the rules. I just learned to play the game better than everyone else." "Then why are you here?" Vivienne asked, genuinely curious now. "You could have any woman in England. Why come to a house full of debt and desperation?" "Because women in ballrooms lie," the Duke said bluntly. "They smile and flirt and pretend to be interested in things they couldn't care less about. They perform for me like trained dancers, hoping I won't notice that there's nothing beneath the performance." He took another step closer, and Vivienne's breath caught. "But a woman who's desperate, a family that has no choice, that's when you see the truth. That's when the masks come off." "And what truth did you see today?" Vivienne managed to ask, though her voice came out softer than she intended. The Duke looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "I saw 3 girls who've been trained to perform, sweet and pretty and utterly forgettable. I could marry any of them, and within a year I'd forget which one I chose." His hand came up, one finger tilting her chin up slightly. "But you're not performing. You're not lying. You look at me like I'm just a man instead of a title and a fortune." "You are just a man," Vivienne said. "A powerful one, certainly, a wealthy one, but still just a man." His thumb brushed across her jawline, the touch so light she might have imagined it. No one has treated me like just a man since I inherited the dukedom 15 years ago. Then perhaps you should surround yourself with better people." That almost smile returned. "Perhaps I should." He stepped back abruptly, letting his hand fall. "Tell me, Lady Vivienne, if I asked you to marry me right now, what would you say?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Vivienne stared at him, searching for signs that he was mocking her. But his face was serious, his gray eyes steady. "I would ask why," she said carefully. "Because you're honest. Because you don't simper or perform. Because you look at this arrangement for exactly what it is and don't pretend otherwise." The Duke clasped his hands behind his back again, his posture military straight. "I don't need a wife who loves me. I don't need romance or affection. I need an heir, and I need someone who can run my household with competence and intelligence. In exchange, you'd have more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes, complete freedom to do as you please, and the protection of my name and title." It was the most pragmatic marriage proposal in the history of marriage proposals. No poetry, no passion, just a business transaction laid out with brutal honesty. "And if I refuse?" Vivienne asked. "Then I'll choose one of your sisters, Charlotte, most likely. She seems biddable enough. Your father's debts will be paid, your family will be saved, and you'll remain the forgotten spinster in the corner." He paused. "But Lady Vivienne, if you refuse me, I'll make sure your father understands that it was your choice. I'll make sure your stepmother knows that you could have saved them all and chose not to. I'll make sure everyone in this house knows that their ruin could have been prevented if only you'd said yes." There it was, the cruelty that matched his reputation. Not physical violence or obvious malice, but something subtler, the knowledge of exactly where to apply pressure to get what he wanted. "That's blackmail," Vivienne said flatly. "That's strategy," the Duke corrected. "I want you, Lady Vivienne. I've made that clear. But I'm not going to pretend this is anything other than what it is, a transaction. You give me what I need. I give you what you need. Everyone benefits." He tilted his head slightly. "The only question is whether you're brave enough to take what I'm offering." Vivienne's mind raced. Marriage to the Duke of Blackmoore, escape from Hartwell House, from Cordelia's cruelty, from the suffocating invisibility of her current existence. Money, power, freedom, everything she'd never dared dream of having. But at what cost? Marriage to a man she didn't know, didn't love, who viewed her as a business acquisition. Bearing children for a man who admitted openly that he didn't need or want her affection, becoming part of a transaction instead of a partner in a marriage. And yet, there was something in his eyes when he looked at her. Something that suggested the Duke of Blackmoore was not quite as cold as he pretended to be. Something that made her think there might be more to this proposal than pure pragmatism. "If I say yes," Vivienne said slowly, "I have conditions." Interest sparked in his gray eyes. "Name them. I won't be displayed like a trophy. I won't attend every ball and soiree in London just to prove you made a good investment. I want my freedom to read, to think, to be myself, without constantly performing as the perfect duchess." "Agreed. I hate society events anyway." "Next?" "I want my own funds. An allowance that's mine to spend as I see fit, without having to ask permission or justify my choices." "Done. You'll have access to an account in your name, generous enough that you could buy Hartwell House twice over if you wanted." He paused. "Though I suspect you won't want to." Vivienne felt something unfurl in her chest, not quite hope, but something close to it. "And I want your word that you won't use me to hurt my sisters. Whatever happens between us, whatever this marriage becomes, Charlotte and Beatrice and Dorothea don't deserve to suffer for our choices." The Duke studied her for a long moment. "You're protecting them. Even after years of being pushed aside, ignored, treated as if you don't exist, you're still protecting them." "They're my sisters," Vivienne said simply. None of this is their fault. Something shifted in the Duke's expression, a softening, barely perceptible but there nonetheless. You have my word. Your sisters will be treated with respect and courtesy. I'll even provide dowries for them if you wish. Good ones. Enough that they can make their own choices instead of being sold off like your father tried to do today. That settled it. Vivienne took a deep breath, feeling as if she stood on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into dark water with no idea how deep it went. Then yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. The Duke's face remained impassive, but Vivienne saw his shoulders relax fractionally, saw his hands unclasp from behind his back. He stepped forward and held out his hand. Then we have an agreement, Lady Vivienne. Or should I say, future Duchess of Blackmoore. Vivienne placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and sure, and she felt the world shift beneath her feet. One more thing, the Duke said, still holding her hand. I want the wedding to happen quickly. Within the month. I don't see the point in lengthy engagements. Neither do I, Vivienne agreed. The sooner I'm out of this house, the better. His grip tightened slightly. You won't regret this, won't I? Vivienne met his eyes steadily. You've essentially blackmailed me into marriage, Your Grace. You've made it clear this is a transaction, not a love match. You want an heir and a competent household manager, nothing more. Those don't sound like the ingredients for a regret-free life. Perhaps not, the Duke said, but they're honest ingredients. I won't lie to you, Lady Vivienne. I won't make promises I can't keep or swear eternal devotion I don't feel. What I will give you is honesty, security, and freedom. For some women, that's worth more than empty declarations of love. He was right, and Vivienne knew it. She'd spent 28 years watching her sisters be courted with poetry and promises, watching men swear undying love while eyeing the size of dowries. At least the Duke was honest about what he wanted. Then I suppose we understand each other, Vivienne said. I suppose we do. He released her hand and stepped back. I'll inform your father of our engagement. I'll also inform him that his debts are now my concern and he's not to trouble you or your sisters about money ever again. You'll move to Blackmoore House 2 weeks before the wedding to prepare. I'll send my solicitors to handle the settlements. It was all so efficient, so businesslike, like arranging a merger between companies rather than a marriage between people. The Duke moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. Lady Vivienne? One more thing. Yes? He looked back at her, and for just a moment, that careful mask slipped. She saw something in his eyes, not quite vulnerability, but a kind of raw honesty that matched her own. Thank you, he said quietly, for not lying to me, for not pretending this is something it isn't, for having the courage to say yes, even when you don't know what you're walking into. He paused. I think we might actually suit each other rather well. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him, leaving Vivienne alone in the drawing room with her racing heart and her completely upended life. She heard voices in the corridor, the Duke's deep tones, her father's stammering replies, Cordelia's shrill protest that was quickly silenced. She heard the word engagement and eldest daughter and settlements. She heard Cordelia's shriek of disbelief. Vivienne walked to the window and looked out at the rain, which was finally starting to ease. The Duke's carriage still waited in the drive, the horses stamping restlessly. In less than an hour, her entire existence had shifted. She was going to be the Duchess of Blackmoore. She was going to marry the most feared man in England. She was going to leave Hartwell House forever and step into a life she couldn't even begin to imagine. The door burst open behind her. Cordelia stormed in, her face mottled with fury. What did you do? She hissed. What did you say to him? He chose you. You. Over my beautiful daughters. He chose the old spinster who can't even dress herself properly. Vivienne turned slowly from the window. For the first time in years, she felt something other than that crushing invisibility. She felt powerful. "I told him the truth," she said calmly. "That's all. I told him the truth, and apparently that's worth more than beauty or youth or musical talent." "This is a disaster," Cordelia said, pacing like a caged animal. "An absolute disaster. The scandal of it, the eldest daughter married before the younger ones. People will talk. They'll say your sisters must have some defect if they were passed over for you." "Then perhaps you should have thought of that before you let Father offer all four of us like items at auction," Vivienne said sharply. She felt years of swallowed words rising up, demanding to be spoken. "You wanted a daughter to marry the Duke. Well, now you have one. The fact that it's me instead of one of your precious girls is something you'll simply have to accept." Lord Hartwell appeared in the doorway, looking even more gray and shaken than before. "Vivienne, a word, please." Cordelia swept out, muttering furiously under her breath. Vivienne faced her father across the drawing room, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. He looked old and broken and defeated. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "I never meant for it to come to this. I never meant to—" He broke off, his voice cracking. "You're my daughter, my eldest child, and I sold you like Charlotte or Beatrice or Dorothea," Vivienne finished quietly. "You were willing to sell any of us, Father. The only difference is that the Duke chose me. Don't pretend you're suddenly overcome with paternal feeling now that the transaction is complete." Her father flinched as if she'd struck him. "I deserve that. I deserve your anger. But Vivienne, you don't have to do this. If you want to refuse him, I'll find another way. I'll sell the house. You'll do nothing," Vivienne interrupted. "Because there is no other way, and we both know it. The Duke is your only option, and I've already accepted his proposal." She moved toward the door, then paused. "But Father, after the wedding, I don't want to see you again. You've made your choices. Now I'm making mine." She left him standing in the drawing room and climbed the stairs to her small room on the 3rd floor, the room she'd occupied for 20 years, watching the seasons change through her single window, listening to her sister's laughter drift up from below. Now she was leaving it all behind. Vivienne sat on her narrow bed and let herself feel the weight of what she'd just done. She'd agreed to marry a stranger, a cold, calculating stranger who wanted her for practical reasons and nothing more. But he'd also seen her when everyone else looked through her. He'd asked for her specifically when he could have had any of the beautiful girls downstairs. He'd offered her freedom and honesty instead of pretty lies. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps it had to be enough, because the alternative was staying here, in this house, invisible and forgotten, watching her life slip away year by year until she became nothing but the sad spinster aunt her sister's children whispered about. No. Whatever the Duke of Blackmoore was offering, whatever this marriage would become, it had to be better than that. It had to be. And the 2 weeks before Vivienne moved to Blackmoore House passed in a blur of activity that seemed to happen around her rather than to her. Seamstresses appeared with bolts of fabric for her trousseau. The Duke's solicitors arrived with endless documents to sign. Cordelia oscillated between fury at Vivienne's elevation and frantic social climbing as she realized that having a daughter married to the Duke of Blackmoore might actually improve her own standing in society. Charlotte, Beatrice, and Dorothea reacted to the engagement with varying degrees of confusion and relief. Charlotte seemed genuinely happy for Vivienne, though puzzled by the Duke's choice. Beatrice was openly relieved that she wouldn't have to marry a man with such a frightening reputation. And Dorothea, sweet 17-year-old Dorothea, cried and said she would miss Vivienne terribly. It was Dorothea's reaction that nearly broke through Vivienne's careful composure. She had spent so many years being invisible that she hadn't realized anyone would actually miss her presence. "You'll come visit me," Vivienne told her youngest sister, holding her close. "The Duke promised you'd all be welcome, and he's providing proper dowries for all three of you. You'll be able to marry for love instead of necessity." "But you're not marrying for love," Dorothea said with the blunt wisdom of the young. "Are you?" Vivienne had no answer for that. The Duke himself did not visit again during those 2 weeks. Instead, he sent a steady stream of gifts, books for Vivienne's collection, jewels that must have cost a fortune, a mare of impeccable bloodlines for her to ride. Each gift came with a brief note in bold, masculine handwriting, usually just a few words. "Thought you might enjoy this," or "saw this and thought of you." They were not love letters, but they suggested that Sebastian Blackmoore was thinking about her, which was more than Vivienne had expected. On the day she was to move to Blackmoore House, Vivienne packed her few possessions, mostly books and a handful of items that had belonged to her mother, into 2 small trunks. Everything else she left behind. She wanted nothing from Hartwell House except her memories of her mother, who had died too young and left Vivienne to navigate a world that had no place for honest, intelligent women. The Duke sent his own carriage for her, far grander than anything the Hartwells owned. Vivienne said her goodbyes in the entrance hall, noting with bitter amusement that Cordelia couldn't quite bring herself to embrace her stepdaughter even now. Her father looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Only her sisters seemed genuinely sad to see her go. "Be happy," Charlotte whispered, squeezing Vivienne's hands. "Or at least, be free." Vivienne carried those words with her as the carriage pulled away from Hartwell House for the last time. Blackmoore House was not in London proper, but rather in the countryside, about an hour's drive from the city, close enough for convenience but far enough for privacy. As the carriage turned onto the long drive, Vivienne got her first real look at her future home and felt her breath catch. It was enormous. Not just large, but genuinely massive. A sprawling stone manor that looked like it had been standing since the Tudors. Wings extended in both directions from the central building, and she could see extensive gardens stretching out behind, still green despite the November chill. This was wealth on a scale Vivienne had never experienced. Hartwell House had been respectable, comfortable even before her father's debts mounted. But this was power made manifest in stone and glass and immaculate grounds. The carriage stopped before the main entrance, where a line of servants waited to greet their new mistress. Vivienne counted at least 20 people, footmen, maids, and at their head, an elderly butler with impeccable posture and knowing eyes. "Lady Vivienne," he said with a bow as she descended from the carriage, "welcome to Blackmoore House. I am Winters, the head butler. His Grace has instructed us to ensure your comfort during your stay with us before the wedding." "Thank you, Winters." Vivienne managed to keep her voice steady despite feeling overwhelmed. "I appreciate your welcome. His Grace is currently in London on business, but will return tomorrow evening. In the meantime, Mrs. Crawford, our housekeeper, will show you to your rooms and acquaint you with the household." He gestured to a stern-looking woman in black who stepped forward with a curtsy. "My lady," Mrs. Crawford said. Her voice was brisk but not unkind. "If you'll follow me?" Vivienne was led through a series of rooms that left her almost dizzy. The entrance hall alone was larger than the entire ground floor of Hartwell House, with a soaring ceiling and a grand staircase that split into 2 curving arms. Paintings lined the walls, ancestors, presumably, all looking stern and aristocratic, and utterly unlike Vivienne herself. Her rooms, and they were rooms, plural, occupied an entire wing on the 2nd floor. There was a bedroom with a bed large enough for 4 people, a sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens, a dressing room that could have housed her entire wardrobe 10 times over, and even a small library. "His Grace had the library installed specifically for you, my lady," Mrs. Crawford said, a note of approval in her voice. "He said you were a reader and would want books close at hand." Vivienne walked into the library and felt something in her chest tighten. The shelves were already partially filled with her own books from Hartwell House, she realized, the ones that had been in her small room. The Duke must have had them brought over in advance. But there were also new books, hundreds of them, carefully selected to match her interests. She saw philosophy, poetry, histories, novels. He'd been paying attention. In the brief time they'd spent together, Sebastian Blackmoore had been paying attention to what she cared about. "It's perfect," Vivienne said quietly. "Please convey my thanks to His Grace." Mrs. Crawford's stern face softened slightly. "He'll be pleased to hear it, my lady. Now, shall I show you the rest of the house, or would you prefer to rest after your journey?" "The rest of the house, please. If I'm to be mistress here, I should know what I'm managing." That earned her a look of genuine respect from the housekeeper. "As you wish, my lady." The tour took over an hour. Blackmoore House contained 42 rooms, not counting servants' quarters. There was a ballroom that could hold 300 people, a dining room with a table that seated 50, a music room, a billiards room, a conservatory full of exotic plants, and a portrait gallery that stretched for what felt like miles. "The late Duchess, His Grace's mother, passed away 3 years ago," Mrs. Crawford explained as they walked through the portrait gallery. "His Grace has been managing the household himself since then, with my assistance. He's been selective about company, prefers solitude to social engagements." Vivienne studied the portrait of the previous Duchess, a beautiful woman with kind eyes and the same dark hair as her son. What was she like? Mrs. Crawford hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. She was lovely, kind, generous, genuinely interested in the welfare of the staff and the tenants. His Grace took her death very hard, became even more reserved than he'd been before. Reserved. That was a tactful way of saying cold, Vivienne supposed. They ended the tour in the gardens, which were extensive enough to get lost in. There were formal gardens near the house, but beyond that lay wilder areas, walking paths through woods, a small lake, even a folly on a distant hill. "You're free to explore anywhere you like, my lady," Mrs. Crawford said. "His Grace has given explicit instructions that you're to be granted every courtesy and freedom. You're to consider yourself mistress of the house even before the wedding." It was an unexpected kindness, though Vivienne wondered if it was kindness or simply the Duke's practical nature. He'd said he wanted a wife who could run his household competently. Perhaps he was giving her time to learn the lay of the land before she officially took on the role. That evening, Vivienne dined alone in a small breakfast room that was more manageable than the massive formal dining room. The food was excellent, served by silent, efficient footmen who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. It was all very elegant and very lonely. After dinner, she retreated to her library and tried to lose herself in a book, but her mind kept wandering. Tomorrow the Duke would return. Tomorrow she would see him again for only the second time, and he would be the man she was going to marry in less than 2 weeks. She barely knew him. She knew he was cold, calculating, brutally honest. She knew he looked at marriage as a transaction and her as a means to an heir. She knew he'd blackmailed her into accepting his proposal, even if the blackmail had been subtle. But she also knew he'd seen her when no one else had. She knew he'd chosen her specifically, not settled for her as a last resort. She knew he'd filled a library with books for her and sent her gifts that suggested he was actually thinking about what might make her happy. What kind of man did all of that while simultaneously maintaining that he wanted a marriage based purely on pragmatism? Vivienne was still pondering that question when she finally went to bed, climbing into that enormous bed and feeling very small and very alone in the darkness of Blackmoore House. Widow. With. Widow. With. The Duke returned the following evening just as the sun was setting, painting the western sky in shades of orange and pink. Vivienne had spent the day exploring the grounds and trying to memorize the names of the extensive staff. Now she stood in her sitting room, watching from the window as his carriage appeared on the long drive. Her heart rate picked up. Foolish, really. This was a business arrangement. There was no reason to be nervous about seeing him again. A knock at her door made her turn. "Enter." Winters appeared, bowing slightly. "His Grace has returned, my lady. He requests your presence in the library downstairs at your convenience. Tell him I'll be down shortly." Vivienne took a moment to check her appearance in the mirror. The new gowns the Duke had commissioned for her had arrived that afternoon, beautiful things in rich fabrics, far finer than anything she'd owned at Hartwell House. She'd changed into one for dinner, a deep blue silk that actually fit her properly, unlike the hand-me-downs and hastily altered dresses she'd worn for years. She looked different. Not beautiful, perhaps, but striking in a way she'd never been before. The dress brought out the unusual gray-green of her eyes. Her dark hair, usually pulled back severely, had been styled by one of the maids into something softer, more elegant. She looked like someone who could be a duchess. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. The library was on the ground floor, a massive room lined with books from floor to ceiling. The Duke stood by the fireplace, still in his traveling clothes, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He turned when she entered, and something flickered across his face, appreciation, perhaps, or surprise. "Lady Vivienne." He set down his glass and moved toward her. "I trust your first day at Blackmoore House has been satisfactory." "It's been overwhelming," Vivienne admitted. "Your home is extensive." "It's your home now, too." He gestured to a chair near the fire. "Please, sit. We should talk." Vivienne settled into the chair, and the Duke took the one opposite, his long legs stretched out toward the fire. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, two strangers about to tie their lives together permanently. "I wanted to thank you," the Duke said finally, "for the library, and the books, and—" she gestured vaguely. "All of it. You didn't have to go to such lengths." "I did, actually," he replied. "You're going to be my wife, my duchess. I want you to be comfortable here. I want you to feel like this is your home, not a prison." He paused, his gray eyes steady on hers. "I know this isn't a conventional arrangement, but that doesn't mean it has to be unpleasant. Most people would disagree with that assessment," Vivienne said dryly. "Marrying a stranger for purely practical reasons sounds like the definition of unpleasant to most." His mouth quirked in that almost smile. "Most people aren't as practical as we are. Is that what we are? Practical, among other things." The Duke leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "I've been thinking about our arrangement, about what it means to marry someone you barely know, and I realized that while I don't need love or romance from this marriage, I do need something." "What?" "Partnership." He said it simply, as if it should be obvious. "I need someone I can trust to manage my household when I'm occupied with business, someone I can speak honestly with, someone who will tell me the truth instead of what they think I want to hear." His eyes held hers. "You've already proven you can do all of that, but for this to really work, we need to understand each other better." "So what do you propose?" Vivienne asked. "Conversations. Real ones. Between now and the wedding, I want us to spend time together every evening, talking, getting to know each other, building the foundation of this partnership." He must have seen her skepticism because he added, "I know it sounds strange given that I'm the one who insisted this is purely transactional, but even transactions work better when both parties understand what they're getting." It made a strange kind of sense, and Vivienne found herself curious about this man who disrupted her entire life. Who was Sebastian Blackmoore when he wasn't being the Duke? What had made him so cold, so calculating? Why had he chosen her? "All right," she said. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." He settled back in his chair, his expression intent. "Start with why you never fought back." You spent years being pushed aside by your family, treated as if you were invisible. You're clearly intelligent enough and strong-willed enough to have challenged that treatment. So why didn't you? The question went straight to the heart of things, past polite conversation into territory that actually mattered. Vivienne appreciated that, even as it made her uncomfortable. "Because I was 8 years old when my mother died," she said quietly. 8 years old and grieving, and my father brought home a new wife who made it very clear that I was unwelcome. I tried, at first, to assert myself, but every time I did, Cordelia would punish me in small ways, forgetting to include me at dinner, giving my toys to her own daughters, making sure I knew I was tolerated, not loved. She looked into the fire, remembering. After a while, I learned that it was easier to be invisible than to constantly fight for scraps of affection from people who didn't want to give them. "That's not weakness," the Duke said. "That's survival. Perhaps. Or perhaps it's cowardice." Vivienne met his eyes. "I survived, yes, but I also let them shape me into someone small and quiet and forgettable. I let them win." "Did you?" He leaned forward again. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're about to become one of the most powerful women in England. You're about to escape that house forever, with your freedom and your dignity intact. Sounds to me like you won." Vivienne felt something warm unfurl in her chest at his words. "I suppose that depends on how this marriage turns out." "Then we'll make sure it turns out well," the Duke said simply. "My turn to answer questions. What do you want to know about me?" Vivienne had 1,000 questions, but she chose the one that had been bothering her since that first meeting. "Why did you really choose me? And don't tell me it's because I'm honest. Plenty of women could learn to be honest if that's what you wanted." The Duke was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "Do you remember when you were standing in that drawing room, telling me exactly what you thought of the entire arrangement? Calling your father desperate and me a man who buys what he wants? Yes. You looked at me like I was just a man, not a title, not a fortune, not the Duke of Blackmoore with all the fear and power that name carries. Just a man." He paused. "No one has looked at me like that in 15 years, Lady Vivienne. Everyone sees the title first. They see what I can do for them, what they can get from me, how they can use my name and my money for their own advantage. But you?" His gray eyes were intense in the firelight. "You saw me, and you weren't impressed. You weren't frightened. You were just honest. So you chose me because I wasn't awed by you." "I chose you because you treated me like a human being instead of a god or a monster," he corrected. "That's rarer than you might think in my world." Vivienne absorbed that, understanding clicking into place. The Duke of Blackmoore was isolated by his own power, trapped in a cage of wealth and status where genuine human connection was nearly impossible. No wonder he seemed so cold. When everyone you meet wants something from you, when no one sees past your title, warmth becomes a liability. "I'm not particularly warm either," she said. "In case you haven't noticed." "I noticed. I think we match rather well in that regard." He smiled, a real smile this time, not just that almost curve of his mouth. It transformed his face completely, making him look younger and almost approachable. Two cold people building a warm partnership through sheer stubborn practicality. There's something poetic about that. Despite herself, Vivienne laughed. That's one way to look at it. They talked for hours that night, long past when Vivienne would normally have retired. They talked about books and politics, about estate management and philosophy. The Duke asked her opinions on matters of business and actually listened to her answers. Vivienne asked him about his travels. He'd been to Italy, France, even as far as India, and he described the places with an eloquence that suggested he might be more than just the cold aristocrat he presented to the world. When Vivienne finally retired to her rooms well past midnight, she felt like she'd seen a glimpse of the man beneath the title, and to her surprise, She liked what she'd seen. And came. And came. The days before the wedding developed a rhythm. Mornings, Vivienne would meet with Mrs. Crawford to learn the intricacies of managing a house the size of Blackmoore. Afternoons, she would explore the grounds or read in her library. And every evening, she and the Duke would meet for dinner and conversation. Slowly, methodically, they built the foundation of their partnership. Vivienne learned that Sebastian Blackmoore had inherited the dukedom at 20 when his father died suddenly. He'd been thrust into power far younger than expected, forced to learn ruthlessness out of necessity when older, more experienced men tried to take advantage of his youth. The coldness he projected wasn't natural, it was armor he'd built to survive in a world that viewed any show of vulnerability as weakness. I had to be twice as hard, twice as unforgiving as anyone else, he told her one night. Otherwise, they would have destroyed me. There were men who'd been waiting for my father to die so they could swoop in and take what was ours. I couldn't let them see me grieve. I couldn't let them see me doubt. So I became the Duke of Blackmoore, cold, calculating, feared. And after a while, I forgot how to be anything else. Until now? Vivienne asked softly. He looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw something vulnerable in those gray eyes. Until now, you're making me remember that there might be more to life than just winning. The Duke learned that Vivienne had educated herself through sheer determination, reading everything she could get her hands on to escape the loneliness of Hartwell House. She told him about her mother, who had encouraged her curiosity before dying too young. She told him about the years of invisibility, of watching her sisters be groomed for society while she was forgotten. It made me angry, she admitted. For years, I was so angry, but eventually the anger burned itself out, and all that was left was resignation. I thought that was all my life would ever be. Invisible, forgotten, alone. You're not alone anymore, Sebastian said, and reached across the table to take her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her since that initial meeting, and Vivienne felt the warmth of his palm against hers like a brand. She didn't pull away. 5 days before the wedding, they were walking in the gardens when Sebastian suddenly stopped on the path. There's something I need to tell you, about the marriage, about what I expect. Vivienne felt her stomach tighten. Here it was, the other shoe dropping. All right. I told you I need an heir. That's still true, but I want you to know that I won't force the issue. His gray eyes were serious. I won't come to your room unless you invite me. I won't demand my husbandly rights. When and if that part of our marriage happens, it will be because we both want it to, not because of duty or obligation. Vivienne stared at him. This was not what she'd expected. Most men would consider her body part of the transaction, something they'd purchased along with her name and her obedience. That's very considerate, she managed. It's decent, Sebastian corrected. There's a difference. I may have blackmailed you into this marriage, but I'm not a monster. Your body is your own, Vivienne, always. The use of her first name, without the formal title, made something warm bloom in her chest. Thank you for that, and for all of this. She gestured at the gardens, the house beyond, the life he was giving her. You've been far kinder than you had to be. Perhaps I'm not as cold as I thought I was, he said quietly. Or perhaps you're bringing out sides of me I'd forgotten existed. He paused, then added, I find myself looking forward to our evenings together, to hearing what you think about things, to watching you argue with me when you disagree. I haven't felt that way about another person's company in, I can't remember how long. Neither have I, Vivienne admitted. For different reasons, obviously, but neither have I. They stood there in the garden path, the November wind ruffling Vivienne's skirts and Sebastian's dark hair, and something passed between them. Not love, it was too soon for that, too complicated by the circumstances of their arrangement, but something, understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of genuine affection. "The wedding is in 5 days," Sebastian said. "After that, you'll be the Duchess of Blackmoore. Are you ready?" "No," Vivienne answered honestly. "But I'm choosing to do it anyway." He smiled that real smile she was learning to recognize. "That's all any of us can do. Choose to move forward even when we're terrified." "Are you terrified?" Vivienne asked, surprised. "Of course I am." He started walking again, and she fell into step beside him. "I'm about to tie my life to someone I met 3 weeks ago. I'm about to make you responsible for everything I've built. I'm about to let someone pass the walls I've spent 15 years constructing." He glanced at her. "That's absolutely terrifying. Then why do it?" "Because the alternative is worse. Living behind those walls forever. Dying alone because I was too proud or too scared to let anyone in." He stopped again, turning to face her fully. "You asked me why I really chose you. Here's the full truth. I chose you because when I look at you, I don't feel alone. And I've felt alone for 15 years, Vivienne. I'm tired of it." The raw honesty in his voice made Vivienne's throat tighten. She understood that loneliness. She'd lived with it her entire adult life. "I feel that way too," she said softly. "When I'm with you. Not alone." Sebastian reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. "Then perhaps we can be not alone together," he said. "That sounds like a solid foundation for a marriage," Vivienne replied, and was rewarded with his laugh, a real, genuine laugh that made her realize how rarely he must allow himself that kind of unguarded joy. 22222222222. The wedding took place on a cold December morning with only a handful of witnesses present. Vivienne had insisted on a small ceremony, and Sebastian had readily agreed. Neither of them wanted the spectacle of a society wedding, with hundreds of strangers watching them make vows they weren't sure they could keep. Vivienne's sisters attended, along with her father, though Cordelia made her displeasure known by wearing black as if attending a funeral. Sebastian's few close friends were there, men he'd known since university, who looked surprised but pleased to see their cold friend actually marrying. The ceremony itself was brief. Vivienne wore a gown of ivory silk, simple but elegant, her mother's pearls at her throat. Sebastian wore black, as always, looking severe and handsome and utterly unreadable as he waited for her at the altar. When Vivienne walked down the aisle without her father, she'd refused to be given away. Like property, she kept her eyes on Sebastian's face. And as she drew closer, she saw his expression shift. The coldness melted away, replaced by something warm and real and almost vulnerable. "You look beautiful," he murmured when she reached his side, quiet enough that only she could hear. "You look terrified," she replied, just as quietly. "That too." They made their vows with steady voices, each one a promise, to honor, to respect, to stand together against whatever came. They didn't promise love, neither of them were ready for that lie. But they promised partnership, and in that moment, it felt like enough. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Sebastian kissed her for the first time. It was brief, almost chaste, but Vivienne felt it all the way to her toes, a spark of something that might, given time and care, grow into something more. The small wedding breakfast afterward was almost pleasant. Charlotte pulled Vivienne aside at one point, tears in her eyes. "Are you happy?" her sister asked. "Please tell me you're at least not miserable." Vivienne thought about the question. Was she happy? She wasn't sure she knew what happiness felt like anymore. But she wasn't miserable. She was hopeful, tentatively, cautiously hopeful. "I'm well," she told Charlotte. "Better than I was, and that's enough for now." When the guests finally left and Vivienne and Sebastian were alone in the vast emptiness of Blackmoore House, they stood together in the entrance hall. suddenly awkward with each other in a way they hadn't been during their evening conversations. "So," Sebastian said finally, "we're married." "So we are. I have some work to attend to in my study. Estate business that can't wait." He paused. "But perhaps we could dine together this evening? Continue our conversations?" Relief flooded through Vivienne. He wasn't going to demand immediate consummation. He was giving her space, time, the same courtesy he'd promised in the garden. "I'd like that," she said. Sebastian smiled, and for the first time, Vivienne thought she saw genuine fondness in his gray eyes. "Until dinner, then, Duchess." He left her standing in the entrance hall, and Vivienne looked around at her new home, truly hers now, by law and by right. She was Lady Vivienne Blackmoore, Duchess of Blackmoore, one of the most powerful women in England. She was also Sebastian's wife, partner to a man she was only beginning to understand, mother to children not yet conceived, mistress of a house that could fit Hartwell House inside it 3 times over. It was overwhelming, terrifying, utterly unlike anything she'd imagined for her life. But as Vivienne climbed the stairs to her chambers, their chambers now, though Sebastian had made it clear he'd use the adjoining room until she wanted otherwise, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not happiness. Exactly. Not yet. But possibility. For the first time in her 28 years, Vivienne's life felt full of possibility.